It should have absolutely no impact on his case. His case is a criminal case. The issue about whether or not Donald Trump is qualified to be on the presidential ballot is purely a civil matter, and it's totally aside. Both issues are completely different. Now, it could be that the Supreme Court, and I've suggested this, is that in order to determine and to, at least if there's any question in their mind, whether or not the evidence that was presented before the January 6th House committee was sufficient on insurrection, they certainly have the right to reach down into the grand jury that brought that indictment and review some of that testimony that has a bearing on this issue. For example, the testimony of Vice President Pence would be highly relevant to this question. And I think if the Supreme Court were to do that, it would certainly show that they're taking the extra mile to look at the issue and come up with a decision based on not just the January 6th committee, but also other testimony, including Donald Trump's own vice president.
So do you think the time it takes them to do that work, even if the Jack Smith case technically is unrelated, could actually cause a timeline issue for the Jack Smith case? Again, this is a trial that he wants to begin in early March. If the court is still enmeshed in this 14th Amendment question, does that move that timeline farther out?
Totally irrelevant to that. Has nothing to do with it.
Okay.
The only issue that right now is delaying the D.C. case is this issue about presidential immunity, which is going to be argued before the D.C. Circuit this Tuesday. I would suspect that they are going to deny Trump's claim for immunity. It's going to be very quick. And I also suspect the Supreme Court will not take up that issue. They have enough problems already now with the 14th Amendment. So I think this case is going to go in March as scheduled.
On the subject of scheduling and dates around this case, in regard to it specifically, Trump today accused Jack Smith of violating a stay order and wants him held in contempt as a result. What's your thought on that matter?
Total nonsense, all political. Has nothing to do with what Jack Smith is doing. He is entitled to file motions in the case in D.C. The only thing that the stay does is it means that Trump's lawyers don't have to do anything until the D.C. Circuit rules. Again, it's just posturing by Donald Trump.
Well, so let's turn to not Donald Trump, but the role of other actors in this, including the justices. This is something you and I have discussed before, the issue of Clarence Thomas, knowing how closely his wife, Ginny Thomas, is tied to many of these issues that this court is dealing with or going to have to deal with. How should we be thinking about what happens if Clarence Thomas does not recuse himself and what it means for the court going forward?
Well, certainly he should recuse himself. I mean, his wife was involved with Mark Meadows in discussions with people in the White House that all surrounded this insurrection and what occurred on January 6th. So by every right, he should not be deciding this case. However, there's really nothing to enforce that. If Clarence Thomas decides that he wants to decide the case and be involved, he can do it. So we'll just have to see what happens. If he does, it's certainly not going to help the reputation of the court. And I'm sure that others on the court aren't going to be too happy about it. But there is nothing really with any teeth to enforce that kind of recusal.
Yeah, I guess we will have to wait and see. Finally, Nick, I'd love to get your sense of something we've talked about a few times on this program and over the course of the last several weeks, which is the notion of the judicial branch, of the court system, deciding these things that are so crucial to American democracy, rather than all of it being in the hands of the American voter. What role should the courts serve here? Do you see merit to that argument that this is up to the electorate? It shouldn't be up to people on a bench.
Well, it's not really up to the electorate. There are a whole series of items in the Constitution that are prerequisites and pre-qualifiers before somebody can even run for president. He has to be 35 years old at least, has to have been born in the United States, has to have resided in the United States for at least 14 years, cannot if he's been re-elected twice as president, cannot be elected a third time. And the last requirement is this one, that he cannot have been in a situation where he took an oath to defend the Constitution, engaged in an insurrection, and then hold office in the federal government, president and other offices. So these are all prerequisites before you even get into the game, before you even get into the election. And the obvious branch of our government to enforce those rules is the Supreme Court. Now, keep in mind, this has never happened before with any of these rules. No one who's been 14 or 20 has tried to run for president and taken this up with anybody to try and determine whether the person was really 35 or 14, nor were they a citizen born in the U.S. And certainly no president before this has ever been involved in an insurrection against his own government.